Welcome to today's episode of Think Change. I'm Sara Pantuliano. Apologies in advance for my voice, I have a cold, but today's discussions is very timely and we didn't want to delay it. For decades, US foreign assistance has played a critical role in humanitarian crises, in supporting economic development, in global security. It has been at the forefront of efforts to eradicate and contain infectious diseases like polio, HIV/AIDS, and of course, fighting COVID-19. On the humanitarian front, US foreign assistance has provided a lifeline to refugees. It has also supported various migration management issues and has helped prevent famine in Somalia, in Sudan, in Nigeria, in Yemen. But as of today, all of this work is at standstill. On 24th January, the US government announced a sudden 90-day freeze on foreign assistance. It triggered widespread instability across the global development sector. In the days that followed, the harm was visible. Antiretroviral drugs for HIV patients ran out, landmine clearance efforts stopped, and critical humanitarian operations were left in limbo. Although an exemption was later introduced for life-saving humanitarian assistance, its scope remains unclear. From humanitarian organizations to government agencies, many are scrambling to understand the full implications of this decision. This is not just an aid freeze, but it looks like an all-out assault on USAID as an institution, and many fear that the agency will not survive in any meaningful form. Legal challenges and democratic pushback in Congress notwithstanding. So today we ask, what does this freeze mean for the wider development sector and for the communities that rely on US assistance? And if USAID can no longer be relied upon, what alternatives exist? To discuss these critical issues, I'm pleased to be joined by Elizabeth Campbell. Elizabeth is our newly appointed Executive Director of ODI Global Washington. She is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary at the U.S. State Department Bureau of Population, Refugees and Migration. Joining Elizabeth is Sarah Charles. Sarah is the former assistant to the administrator in the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance at USAID, and Kate Amquist-Nov, independent consultant and senior advisor on Sudan and former assistant administrator for Africa, also at USAID. Well, let's start with the immediate impact I touched upon briefly in my introduction. What are you seeing on the ground as a result of this freeze? Which programs have already been affected?
Thank you for having us today. The short answer is every single USAID program has been impacted. I think there was a scramble in the days following the initial stop work order to put in place a waiver system after the outcry, particularly from advocates for PEPFAR, the US government's program to prevent and treat HIV and AIDS. And so you saw a waiver process put in place, but it's a waiver in name only. So the administration has said that certain life-saving activities can continue, but as of this morning, no payments have been made by the US government. So organizations have already made the difficult decision to stop procurement on life-saving drugs, also fuel. Very expensive inputs that make things like emergency water and sanitation programs run. I heard from one partner, 1.6 million Darfuris in Sudan cut off from water and sanitation services. I heard from another partner where they've received theoretically a waiver for certain HIV/AIDS activities, but those waivers come with language that makes it clear that the waiver is not in and of itself a guarantee that they'll get paid. And they already have not been paid for $7 million in activities that have already been done. So they're in the process of laying off staff. In fact, they furloughed and laid off a lot of staff last week. So what we're seeing across the board is a stoppage of work, including even the life-saving work.
Maybe to add to Sarah's point, all of which I agree, is even if there was a real attempt at trying to exempt humanitarian assistance and for this administration to provide ongoing life-saving assistance, they've just completely annihilated any capacity to do it. This is an administration who campaigned on and came into office caring deeply about accountability, about risk management, about value for money, about ensuring that US taxpayer funding was going for the purposes, for the express purposes, the stated purposes. All of those systems are related to accountability, integrity, transparency, have basically been suspended and are in the process of being destroyed. So even if somehow there was an important, meaningful change in the so-called waiver process for humanitarian operations, they've kneecapped the United States' ability to do that in a transparent and an effective way. So exactly as Sarah said, there is a notion that humanitarian assistance should continue, but in reality, there's no real capacity or ability for that to happen.
Kate, how do you see it?
Maybe just to add there, Sarah, in addition to Sarah and Elizabeth's points, of course, PEPFAR has gotten a lot of attention, and in principle also has a waiver for life-saving services to continue, but effectively nothing can move because not only have they removed too many staff that are important to the process in terms of contractors of USAID and partners not being paid. They've disconnected the systems and started to move the financial systems over. And once you pull back over 2,000 employees worldwide, probably at a cost of close to $1 billion, if not more, dollars, you don't turn that back on. So I think it's completely disingenuous, the notion that this is a 90-day pause. The stop work order, I think as the former head of the Global Health Bureau most recently keeps saying, it's like stopping to fly the airplane midair, firing the crew, and then just letting everything crash to the ground, right? And so across everything that USAID does, but most especially the humanitarian and the health programming, where people depend on it. So surely children are already dying who've had their nutritious feeding stopped in the middle of this dire famine, certainly in Sudan, and mass starvation that's going on there, but not only in so many countries. In Africa and around the world, the impacts are enormous, and it's a hollowing out, a dismantling. It is an annihilation, I think, of USAID. They do not mean it to come back.
Well, it's mind-boggling, and we want to delve into the systemic implications of what we've seen over the past 2 weeks. But first, let's reflect on what's behind this. Elizabeth, reports indicate that many Americans perceive foreign aid as costly and ineffective. We've seen poll results that show that many believe foreign assistance accounts for a quarter of the federal budget, but in reality, data from 2023 highlights that it represents just 1%, not counting most of the aid to Ukraine. So why this freeze? Is it driven by political strategy? Is it public opinion? Or is something else entirely? What do you believe is really behind this shift in US foreign aid policy?
So what's behind it? First and foremost, what's behind it is the money. Seizing the resources, which are considerable, at least 40 billion, if not more, from USAID, transferring those authorities, or at least the resources, to the State Department, where they purportedly want to align it more closely with a foreign policy agenda. And then, of course, dismantling an entire ecosystem, starting with the vast institution of USAID that is working on a number of policy issues which have historically enjoyed bipartisan support, right? Helping persecuted people, that's an American value, a bipartisan value, something that has been at the center of both Republican and Democratic administrations for decades. They are saying things like this are no longer part of the American value system when it comes to foreign policy, right? So it's about money. It's about completely reorienting and realigning American foreign policy to expressly say it is not about certain things, and to frankly destroy any component of the American foreign policy system, institutions, humans, technical experience and otherwise, who may say human rights matters, the promotion of democracy matters, women's empowerment and equality matters, helping vulnerable people matters. Oh, and by the way, also, providing a wide variety of humanitarian development and other types of support that helps manage all kinds of complex problems that allow the United States to pursue its interests globally. So it's about both of those things. And you see a disconnect happening, right? You see on the one hand, the Secretary of State talking about exemptions and the continuity of certain things, which we are all accustomed to from the American perspective. And on the other hand, frankly, almost rogue actions that are highly effective at speed, aimed at consolidating resources, reappropriating them to different institutions, power centers, and then reapplying them in ways that will be completely foreign to us. So, for example, I would fully expect that some of those resources will be very readily applied to migration management in support of mass deportation, for example. So I think that is what is unfolding, and I think, as Kate said, this is not something you're going to put back in the box because they're dismantling the very pieces of the institutions that give them the cohesiveness and the integrity to be effective.
I think everything that Elizabeth says is true, but I also think there are a couple of more unusual and in some ways insidious threads to what we're seeing. What Elizabeth describes in terms of not necessarily the dismantling of the architecture, but aligning USAID priorities with national security, reducing the amount of resources that go towards these types of activities is consistent with what we've seen from a number of conservative thinkers for a long time. It's what's captured in the Project 2025 document that, while Trump disavowed it during the campaign, has clearly been quite influential in a number of acts in his early days in government. But that document did not call for the dismantling of USAID or the dismantling of these capabilities of the United States. I think what we're seeing is the confluence of a lot of different MAGA threads, including when you combine the dismantling of USAID, a new executive order that came out last week calling for a review of all non-governmental organizations, and comments that the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, said very early in the administration, targeting Catholic charities and the Catholic bishops in particular. You see an ideology that is hostile to non-governmental organizations, is hostile to a globalist view, is hostile to civil society itself. And I think you've also seen the very unique power of a billionaire many times over, who's been given not only the greatest megaphone in the world with the X platform, but also the keys to government. And I think for both Elon Musk and his team, this has become a game almost, an exercise in kind of seeing how quickly we can break something.
You're absolutely right. There is a wider and insidious threat we all need to reckon with and understand how to engage. Focusing on the specific issues around USAID and the aid system, we've obviously seen mergers in Australia, in Canada, in the UK. There has been a lot of discussion around the impact of these measures and how they've been implemented, but obviously nothing as sweeping and brutal as in the US. And of course, the scale of resources USAID was administering was unmatched compared to all the other aid agencies combined. So what do you think these reforms will mean in practice? Do you see any good coming out of it?
Maybe I would jump in here and just reflecting back on my 8 years at USAID under a Republican administration, President George W. Bush. It's all so baffling is too mild of a word, right? Because if it really about a foreign policy review, if it really about a merger and a reorganization of the function of foreign assistance under some new theory that they have the prerogative to bring in this administration. This is not the way that you would go about it if you were sincere, even if you had, vastly different things that you wanted to prioritize in terms of U.S. foreign assistance, from where our bipartisan effort has largely been over the last at least 2 decades, if not more. Yes, we have policy differences and swings from conservative administrations and more liberal administrations, especially in the area of family planning and global health. Yes, every administrator comes in and wants to do a review of programs, and some are stopped and some will continue on. But you don't destroy and you don't punish. You don't destroy the agency, the institution. You don't punish the staff, the employees, the partners, the beneficiaries in the process of doing that. And so I find it quite specious that there's any sincerity into this notion that they're going to merge USAID into state. Right, we have to see how the legal challenges to what's already being done play out, right? Because statutorily, this is not something that can be done through executive action. All of that goes through, in a normal rule of law fashion in the United States, has to go through Congress. And so there is a lawsuit, there's a challenge to what's going on there. But I don't think they're laying any indicators that they mean in any sincere fashion to keep a meaningful foreign assistance program going under any heading, state or USAID or otherwise.
I think Kate is absolutely right. There's been no indication that this is a measured process aimed at reform. There are capabilities that exist at USAID that would be very hard to duplicate at the State Department. USAID, along with ECHO, are kind of unique in being operational donors. They have a large field presence. They manage multi-partner portfolios in a way that is much more difficult for, for example, the Australian government, the Canadian government, and now the British government with the folding of kind of formerly DFID into the Foreign Office. You've seen in all of these countries greater reliance on large awards to UN partners, more focus on core funding. I mean, there are some benefits to that greater focus on core funding, but I don't think you can expect that this administration is going to substitute the kind of multi-partner portfolios that USAID has in some cases in places like Ukraine, dozens and dozens of partners, including a number of local partners, as well as places like the Congo and Sudan. USAID also has some unique capabilities in terms of things like disease monitoring. And you have things like urban search and rescue capabilities. Just this weekend, there was a 7.6 magnitude earthquake in the Caribbean basin, a tsunami warning for Puerto Rico. Had that been just a 100 miles in another direction, could have been catastrophic for some of our near neighbors, and we would have had no urban search and rescue capabilities to deploy, given the destruction that's been done in just the last week and a half.
Elizabeth, Sarah and Kate have both served the USAID, but you served at the State Department. Do you share the same view from the other side?
I mean, they are completely different capabilities. Historically, they've worked in complementary ways. There is absolutely no way the U.S. Department of State can absorb the capabilities, capacity, and approach that USAID has, especially now if they're talking about downsizing the entire institution to some 250 people. So it's not a merger, it's a destruction. they can take the money and they can use that money in new purposes that are completely out of step with the way in which it has been used historically. But there's absolutely no way that the Department of State is going to be doing disease prevention and response, tsunami warning, famine early warning. They do not have any type of, physical operational presence in country, even remotely close to what USAID can do, and including through its vast network of partnerships. None of that exists for the Department of State. So it is a complete fallacy that somehow this is just going to look like what Canada or the UK or Australia have done. It's just not going to happen, which is why fundamentally I think it's about consolidating the resources and repurposing those resources for aims completely outside of global humanitarian and development financing.
Well, a lot of these capabilities were also in the security sector. There is an interconnectedness between development policy, security issues, and governance. Kate, you worked extensively on this in Africa. Very few people are discussing the impact this will have on security implications as well.
No, I think it's profound. I mean, State Department foreign assistance accounts are all on stop work orders too, right? So our security sector assistance is largely through the State Department in Africa and elsewhere. And we've all heard or read some of these sort of eye-popping stories of guards of ISIS fighter camps having to walking off the job because of no payment and having to quickly be restored. Of I think counterterrorism programs in Somalia come to a screeching halt. It just over and over again, the security sector is also deeply impacted by this. But I live in Kenya at the moment, and I sit here, and we already were so concerned about state collapse in Sudan, right, and this worst humanitarian catastrophe on the planet at the moment, and probably unparalleled, in the last 100 years in Africa, at least. I know ODI has spent a lot of focus on that. We look at conflict in Ethiopia and real concerns about possible interstate war there. We look at Goma and Congo and Rwanda and interstate war back in the Great Lakes region. And then you think about the cost of living crises here in Africa and in many other parts of the world too. And when food aid goes away, just in Kenya alone, there are 775,000 refugees, I believe, Elizabeth can correct me, here in Kenya who rely on food, supported by the US government. And that's, if not already come to a screeching halt, it's going to very shortly, because I think, Sarah Charles, I heard over 500,000 metric tons of food commodities are halted or waiting to move at the moment. Not to overstate the importance of USAID, but it's like pulling the skeleton out of the international architecture, right? And so you can't just immediately, figure out how, the elbow and the wrist, relate to each other if there's nothing in between, right? So we have so many things to think about. And I worry that there isn't quite the appreciation on the outside by other donors, by others in the international aid system, that this may not come back.
I completely agree with you. On the other hand, the four of us have long advocated for deep reforms of the system. We must be honest, the system is inefficient, is not inclusive. It has so many issues we've tried to tackle for decades. And as I've often said, it's been like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. We've been tinkering at the edges without fundamentally reshaping the system. I've actually always been concerned that the inertia we've shown in the aid sector might eventually lead to a situation where the baby would be thrown away with the bathwater. And so how do we save the baby and rebuild in a way that protects what was fundamental and valuable? This is seismic, I don't think it's just going to come back. But let's see if we can use this moment to build differently, because going back to the status quo ante isn't an option. So we need to think very differently.
I mean, I completely agree, Sarah. I mean, and I think all of us know that. I mean, I think we're all pro-reform because no system is static, and the most effective systems are dynamic and changing and adapting to realities. And that's critical and important. And there are pieces of the architecture that are antiquated, are ineffective, and need updating, modernization, new ways of looking at things, new partnerships. So I think there's a wide variety of ways that we can go. And if there is going to be any silver lining to this abrupt destruction, it should be all of us who care about these issues because they are in American interest, they are in global interest, they're in the interest of humanity and the environment, to really put forward bold new ideas that may run against the grain of specialized interests or entrenched relationships, but be bold enough to say them out loud and to look at the way in which money can flow differently, how new partnerships can be developed, how the private sector can be central to it, but not overwhelming of it. I think there's a lot of different ways that it can go. And likely it's not going to be a system. It's going to be a compilation of ways of working. I think, one thing I just wanted to pick up on what Kate was saying is that when you pull out the US money expertise, what you're also pulling out is information management, coordination, technical integrity, oversight, compliance, these huge pieces of the system that frankly, many other donors and actors have taken advantage of because they're invisible and they're just there. So those pieces, I mean, will make it impossible for any of the other donors, actors, institutions to simply go forward without the US. So, those things are important. Historically, they've been something that the United States has led. And I think that part of the solution to this has to come from this pool of resources of folks who understand that, by the way, we went from a period, if you look at just on the humanitarian sector from where we started in a period of we have to do something to help. And so we are, airdropping and doing all of these kind of ad hoc things. The whole sector went through this mass professionalization for good policy and other reasons. It may be true that it's reached a point where it's cumbersome and heavy and difficult and all of those things, right? And it needs to be sort of rethought and reconsidered. But the solution isn't to go back to where we started and to have random commandos airdropping food in random places and patting themselves on the back. That's not the solution here, right? We can find and we should find, and by the way, there's lots of ideas out there already, and hopefully the time is now to put some of them forward.
Kate, you're coming in.
Well, I would just quickly add to that. I think one of the challenges with reform efforts over the years for USAID specifically is, in fact, that there's so many layers of oversight. There's so much scrutiny. There's so much reporting and compliance that has to be done, first of all, by USAID staff, and of course, and then that draws on what USAID partners are required to do. So we're all frustrated with localization. We're all bothered that can't happen better. But that's because Congress demands all of these requirements, puts those restrictions on how USAID assistance is moved to whom, what the competitive processes are, what the audit standards must be to be a partner of USAID. Over and over and over again. So there's, tons of papers written on this. My former boss makes this point all the time, Andrew Natsios, that the oversight mechanisms are so many and so overlapping, and they limit then the ability for reform and to think, with a fresh head and to approach things, as Elizabeth is saying, in a modern and adaptive way, learning from all the lessons of the past.
I would agree with all of that. I think I've been having a number of conversations over the weekend. I think we've all been and will continue to be in a bit of a protect mode, trying first to seek a waiver process, then to halt the withdrawal and dismissal of staff, but we need to very quickly pivot to an affirmative vision for what can come next that is grounded in the outcomes we want to see and the capabilities that we need to protect and or build anew, whether that's within the US government or outside of the US government. I do think there are capabilities, as both Kate and Elizabeth alluded to, that aren't even visible to the wider humanitarian community that I'm very concerned about and haven't gotten as much attention. USAID is the belly button for US science to the world. And so the early warning systems that exist and are spreading in the rest of the world, the weather services around the world, those staff are by and large trained by USAID. They get their data from NOAA and NASA and others via partnerships with USAID. And those capabilities are really fundamental to countries around the world having the ability to predict, warn, and respond to growing natural disasters. It's the type of thing that rarely gets attention, but will have really catastrophic and long-lasting impacts across the world. So again, that exercise of kind of looking at what needs saving or where do we need to build alternatives is something that's going to have to happen very, very quickly.
Elizabeth, the current administration has emphasized migration management as a key foreign policy objective. So how do you see this dismantling of USAID impacting their ability to achieve this goal?
This administration's one of their stated very clear foreign policy objectives is migration management. That's very obvious. They're staffing accordingly. Part of, reorienting the resources undoubtedly will be toward that effort. And in their own words, they know and they say and they understand that the migration challenge the US faces is not just something coming from Mexico or from Central or South America or something that's at the Southwest border. It's a global phenomenon. And they sometimes talk about, wanting to reorient the entire State Department toward migration management. They understand that those appearing at the Southwest border are coming from every continent in the world, and they're coming for a wide variety of reasons: extreme poverty, conflict, climate change, of a combination of all of those things. Now, if that is in fact one of their main goals, they've just eviscerated one of the most powerful tools at their disposal to advance that policy outcome. And there's no system that can replace it, because enforcement alone simply cannot tackle this global challenge. It's going to require a wide variety of other tools, including especially soft power. And if you want to look at it, you can look at it in lots of different ways, but so many humanitarian interventions, whether by design, intentionally or unintentionally, they are regional solutions to complex crises. And at the end of the day, they are helping support people where they are. So that pillar of that foreign policy tool now has been destroyed, and it cannot be replaced with anything that will be as close as effective, or, by the way, cheap and affordable.
Perfect. Yeah, sure. Sarah, go ahead.
Can I just add, I think we've seen over the last 3 weeks the incredible power and stickiness of disinformation and misinformation. Some of it quite intentional, some of it boosted by our adversaries. And we don't yet have the tools to counter that effectively. But we do know that one of the most powerful methods of moving people is direct personal connections with people that they know. And for the people that are listening to this podcast, of which I would assume most of them are people that work in this field and know very personally the impact that this work has on individuals, on US national security, on global stability, I would really encourage them to reach out to their direct networks and speak about the work that they do. and engage at an individual level with those in their networks that are skeptical. Because we are fighting an onslaught of disinformation right now that will make it very difficult, whatever happens in the courts, whatever happens in Congress, to sustain the type of capabilities and the work for a long time.
Well, thank you so much, Kate, Elizabeth, and Sarah. It's been invaluable to hear your first-hand insights. The sudden freeze on U.S. foreign assistance has clearly sent shockwaves through the development sector. It has jeopardized critical programs and raised urgent questions about the future of U.S. global engagement. What we've heard today underscores that this is not simply a pause or a reorganization. I think it's a dismantling with far-reaching consequences. Reform was necessary, but cutting USAID is not the solution. The real challenge now is not only to preserve what remains, but also to reimagine urgently a new system of global solidarity that is more inclusive and effective and centered on local agency, as we've long advocated at ODI Global. That's all we have time for today. We will continue to closely follow the developments and encourage you to stay engaged, challenge misinformation, advocate for more sustainable and inclusive approaches to global assistance. You can subscribe to Think Change from your preferred podcast platform. You can also follow us on Blue Sky and LinkedIn if you want to hear more about the conversations, and do consider leaving us a review if you are enjoying the show. Until next time, thank you for listening.